We now come to the final chapter of Ezra Nehemiah, and this is Nehemiah chapter 13, and I entitled this A New Revival. So we've gone a long way from the start of Nehemiah to Ezra, and now we reach the end of Nehemiah, and we see a lot of ups and downs throughout the narrative of coming back from exile, a new exodus, a new beginning, coming back to our own land. It is a revival, isn't it? It is a spiritual milestone of Israel. If you think about what Jewish people would think about the periodization of the history, right? For example, in our history in Malaysia, we think of, all right, the Srivijaya, Majapahit, Srivijaya, and then those are eras, right? And then we think about Malacca after that, and we think about the Portuguese, so the Dutch kind of like got in the mix as well. And then we have the British era. And then we have, and in the east, we have the Raja Putih, and in Sabah, we have the company. And over here, then we have Merdeka, and then Merdeka. So the periodization comes very naturally to us of our own nationhood. For the Jews, their milestones are also quite clear-cut. And these milestones can be actually seen in Matthew chapter 1, when talk about the genealogy of Christ. So it says, Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And it begins with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then reach until King David. And then King David, we have all the kings, and then reach the exile, the deportation to Babylon. And then from the deportation to Babylon, another 14 generations. So the conclusion to verse of that Matthew chapter 1, that section is that, and so from Abraham to David, 14 generations, from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from coming back from the deportation, Zerubbabel, until the Christ, 14 generations. Now, if you think about between Abraham and David, right? There are many characters between Abraham and David. There's Isaac, there's Jacob, there's Joseph, there's Moses, there's Joshua, various judges, Samson, etc. But in terms of like real milestones, they will say, okay, Abraham, and then next one, David, right? So you can, wow, there's so many characters in between, like Moses, right? But they say, oh, you know what? That's just Abraham, big milestone, David, big milestone. And the next big milestone then will be what? The deportation to Babylon. Maybe we don't think of that so much in our Christian way of thinking, that maybe we say, the exile thing is a minor thing. No, that is as major as like calling of Abraham, as major as the enthronement of King David, the deportation to Babylon. And then the fourth milestone is the Messiah, right? Abraham, David, exile, the Messiah. So that's a big milestone that sometimes we may underrate it a little too much as Christian readers. So coming back from the exile is a big thing. Ezra Nehemiah is a big book in terms of the momentousness of what was going on. And they came back and they rebuilt the temple, the sacrifices, and then Ezra comes back and then taught them the law. Nehemiah comes back and rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem. So with every wave of migration back to Jerusalem, from Sheshbazzar to Zerubbabel to Ezra to Nehemiah, each wave brings about something new, brings about a new move, a temple, the law, the wall, right? So that kind of a idea. And so there is a revival of Israel. Before that, they were defeated, vanquished, destroyed. The kingdom was no more. And so now there is this coming back, a remnant coming back, and that was the revival of Ezra, Nehemiah. Okay, so Nehemiah chapter 13, let's read it first. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God. For they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. As soon as the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. They wanted to keep the purity of the returnees. Rightly or wrongly, we can debate, but the intention was to what? Was to obey everything that was written in the word of God. Whether they kept it correctly, they properly misunderstood the commandments is an important thing, but it is a different thing. The intention was to keep everything that was written in the law. Now, before this, Eliashib, the priest, was appointed over the chambers of the house of God and was related to Tobiah, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which are given by commandments to the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priest. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. And after some time, I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem. And I then discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the court of the house of God. And I was very angry. And I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chambers. Then I gave orders and I cleansed the chambers. And I brought back there the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. All right, let's back up. Let's back up. So they've heard the law. Now, something happened before this. The priest, Eliashib, he was in charge of, he's like the quartermaster, right? He's the quartermaster of the temple, was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God. He's like building management, I suppose, right? He's the building management. All the rooms, right? He has charge over all of it. Now, he was related to Tobiah. Tobiah, remember him, right? He's an enemy of the Jews, or at least an enemy of Nehemiah, let's put it that way. He's a Samaritan. But they were related by marriage. Because Tobiah, he was a leader, right? A politician, a man of influence, rich family, powerful. And Eliashib was the priest. So there are two power bases, two powerful families. What do? They enter into a marriage contract, right? They enter into a marriage alliance. This is as old as time, right? This marriage alliances, right, between two powerful families to cement a relationship and to grow in power. So what he did was that he prepared for Tobiah a large apartment. Now, what apartment was this? This was the apartment that was previously the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, the tithes of grain and wine and oil, which are given by commandments to the Levite singers, gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. Now, either Eliashib moved all these things out of that room and gave the apartment to Tobiah for his personal use, or I think what is more likely is that the offering, the contributions of grain offering and frankincense and tithes of grain, wine, and oil, although it was a commandment to be given to the Levites, the stock dwindled. Dwindled because the collection wasn't good. The collection wasn't good because the tithes weren't coming. Now, many churches, this pandemic, post-pandemic now, or endemic, or whatever it is that we're in right now, we're going back to church physically. But we can all testify, isn't it? Well, maybe some churches do better than others. That as we stop going to physical church and do online church, the offering dwindles. People care less and less. And then if the lockdown goes on for another 2 years, let's just say, the money collected will go down even further. It's just simple entropy. So also our CG, and recently me, Chris, and James, and Joshua, we had a talk, had a chat. Remember how things were before the pandemic with Bukit Kasih Fellowship, right? I mean, we were open, and then people are coming, and people bring friends are bringing friends. And for a while, we were doing online. At the start, we had like 20 on average, and we keep things fresh, and people were looking forward. And then one thing after another, and eventually we entered into some kind of a maintenance mode, and the numbers start to dwindle a little. People become less enthusiastic about putting their names on the name list. Over time, if you allow things to rot, maybe rot is a bit too strong of a word, but things will just, entropy will just set in, right? And I think this was what was going on with the temple. The offerings weren't coming in, and so the room that was supposed to store all these things begin to dwindle. Eventually, it's empty, so it eventually becomes an unused room. And then it's like, this room is not used. What the ways? Elisha says, "Hey, Tobiah, my relative, why don't you have this space to do your stuff?" You know, I think that's what happened right here. Now, why was how can all these things happen? While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem. For in Nehemiah was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. So his tenure as the governor of Judah was over. He's not the real king. He's just a governor appointed by the real king. The real king is Artaxerxes, king of Babylon. And yet be recalled. And so you have to go back. So you're not there. Now, if you were there, you could have prevented the rot. If you were there, you could have prevented all these things from going haywire, but you weren't there. So, but then you return. After some time, I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem. I then discovered. So chapter 13 is going to be about what Nehemiah discovered when he came back after having left for a while, right? While I was here, things were doing great. Then I left for a while to go back to Babylon. And then when I come back, what do I find? He says, I discovered the evil that Elisha had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry. And I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. It became his apartment. Then I gave orders, and I cleansed the chambers, and I brought back there the vessels of the house of God, and whatever balance of the grain offering and the frankincense. I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them. So the Levites are the full-time workers. The church full-time workers had not been paid a salary. So what do you do when you're not paid a salary? So no choice. So that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. They had to go back and cari makan, right? because the temple wasn't supporting them anymore financially. So that's how bad things has become, because the tithe hasn't been coming. Either that or the tithe hasn't been coming, but corruption, right? Corruption happened. Well, all kinds of things. But the net result is that the Levites, the singers, were not paid. So I confronted the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? Now, let me take you back to the last time when we met. We read chapter 9 and chapter 10, where in chapter 10, they made some resolutions. They did a big confession of the sins, right? Sins of the father. It was a corporate confession that took responsibility. We fasted, we mourned, we, everything. And then we covenanted, we signed, right? As a people, we signed on the line and said, and we made some resolutions. One of the resolutions they made was Nehemiah chapter 10:39. For the people of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the contribution of grain, wine, and oil to the chambers, where the vessels of the sanctuary are, as well as the priests who minister, and the gatekeepers and the singers. We will not neglect the house of our God. We will not neglect the house of our God. That's chapter 10. Chapter 13. Why is the house of God forsaken? What happened to the revival? Aren't we, Ezra and Nehemiah, isn't Ezra and Nehemiah about the revival? It is the milestone. Abraham, David, Ezra and Nehemiah, Jesus Christ, right? What is going on? At the end of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, we have, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. So the tithe system were reestablished by the governor Nehemiah, and I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, Pedaiah of the Levites, and as the assistant, Hanan the son of Zakur, son of Mattaniah, for they were considered reliable. And the duty was to distribute to their brothers. And then verse 14 has this formula that is quite common in ancient testament formulas. So in ancient times, I think Egyptians do that as well. The leader or maybe a pharaoh or a minister will write a testament, like a testament, and will end with "Remember me, O Horus," or whatever, right? So here in this case, we have, following that format, Nehemiah, "Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I've done for the house of my God and for his service." So that is the common formula in the ancient Near East. When we write the first person account of what you have accomplished, there's always that formula at the end. So that ends one section with the formula. So what we have in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 4 to 14 is that there's a time was now before this, and there was something that Nehemiah saw. He discovered decay of the temple. And he asked, why is the house of God forsaken? And he has a remedy. His remedy was quite successful, I suppose, reestablishing the tithe, bringing back the Levites and the singers so that they get to work in the temple again. The payments go through, right? Their salary comes through, and Tobiah was kicked out. The place was cleansed and reestablished as a storeroom to store all these things, and then ends with the formula, "Remember me, oh my God." So that's the first section. Now the second section, we have, in those days, I saw, right? So this is part of his testimony. What did he find when he come back from abroad, right? He left, and then now he come back, and what did he see? I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath. So now we're talking about the law. the law that Ezra read to them, and they were all like, blessed be the Lord of God, right? And they said, we'll follow all the laws and commandments of God. But people were treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem itself on the Sabbath day. Jerusalem, where the temple is supposed to enforce the law. Now, if you say this happens in far away Galilee, in a neighboring town, Bethlehem, or some other place further away from Jerusalem, maybe that kind of hanky-panky, funny things happen. But right here in the capital city itself, and I warned them on the day where they sold food. Tyrians also, Gentiles, who lived in the city. The Tyrians, not only are they foreigners, traders, Tyrians from Tyre, it's a port city, a trading city, a Phoenician city, right? Lived inside the city. They're not just businessman's house or renting a hotel or a motel. No. They lived in the city. Brought in fish, all kinds of goods, because it's a port city, famous port city, trading around the Mediterranean Sea. So they brought in goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing that you're doing? Profaning the Sabbath day. Did not your fathers act in this way? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Isn't this why we got exiled in the first place, disobeying the law of God, working on the Sabbath? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. This is a far cry from what they covenanted and promised in Nehemiah 10. In their resolution, after the confession of sin, they said, and if the peoples of the land bring in goods or any grain on the Sabbath day to sell, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath day or on a holy day. We will not do it. That's chapter 10. Chapter 13, what is this evil thing you're doing? Profaning the Sabbath day. Well, from that perspective, it's like, I know that we are religious and everything, but let's be practical. Okay? It's the economy, man. Dude, we need wine, grapes, figs, unpasteurized milk. How are we going to keep unpasteurized milk? If those sell a Sabbath, how are we going to keep unpasteurized milk, right? We need our fresh produce. Let's not be so extremist, okay? Fundamentalist, extremist about religion. Yeah, there is a law, Sabbath law. It's a law of the land. It's a law of the country. But even in Malaysia, zebra crossing is a law. Zebra crossing. Traffic police, why you got enforced zebra crossing? I mean, come on lah, right? It's zebra crossing. Yeah, yes, it's against the law, but nobody enforces zebra crossing one. Okay, it makes life harder for everyone. This one makes it easy. Okay, so we can compromise a little. We're not talking about big building projects on Sabbath day. We're talking about pasar malam only lah. Okay, we need market. Market need to function. People need fresh food, produce. Okay, there's no refrigeration back then. So there's that. Now, as soon as it began to grow dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I stationed some of my servants at the gate, that no load might be brought in on the Sabbath day. Then the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. But I warned them and said to them, why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I will lay my hands on you. Wow. rough. Okay, I'll beat you up. From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath day. Then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. So what happened was that, now, how did all the fresh produce, all the figs, wine, grapes, pomegranates, how did all these things flow into the city? You cannot do that secretly. We have built the wall. The wall is supposed to keep what's in and what's out. And we built the wall and we posted guard on the wall. What's going on is that the guards are not doing their work. The guards are not enforcing the law. You have the wall, a physical wall, concrete, hardware. But if the guards, the software, right, not going to uphold the law, then the law remain paralyzed. I mean, you think about the guards also. Did they take a bribe from the merchants to just allow the merchants to enter the city? Probably, on the one hand. On the other hand, bro, zebra crossing, so if a policeman, asking the policeman to enforce zebra crossing, the policeman also, this is just zebra crossing lah. Okay. It's not traffic lights. Traffic lights, okay, we know we can enforce. Zebra crossing. So yeah, murder we enforce, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, all this. Keep the Sabbath. You don't do the regular work, but we're talking about eating. We're talking about food. We're talking about the need to cook. We're talking about the need for fresh produce. So just come and buy, right? And so they just allow the traders in. So you got wall. The wall was one of the great revival of Ezra and Nehemiah. Now the wall is compromised because the guards not doing the job. The reading of the law by Ezra was a major revival, but what happened? The law is now compromised. People not observing the Sabbath. The rebuilding of the old temple and the worship of the temple, major revival. But what happened? It was leased out to Tobiah. The tithes weren't collected. The Levites and the singers had to go home and work in the field to earn a living. So at almost every point of revival, there is decay. That is what Nehemiah chapter 13, the last chapter of Ezra and Nehemiah, is about. So we have the second section. In those days, that's the time. And I saw in Judah, okay, that's a testimony, a decay. The decay of the law and the wall. The law and the wall related. And the question, why are you profaning the Sabbath? And Nehemiah has his remedy. It seems to work, I think. Maybe not as successful as the first one. The first one, he just clean house. This time, he had to threaten them. I'll beat you up. Threatening violence. I'll beat you up if you don't do it. And then there is the concluding formula. You remember this also in my favor, oh my God, and spare me according to the greatness of a steadfast love. So this formula signals the end of that second section. So now, one more section, which is chapter 23 to 27 and beyond. In those days, also, I saw the Jews, now we're talking about ethnicity now, the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod. And they couldn't speak the language of Judah, but only the language of each people. So, okay, if you lose your mother tongue in a foreign land, right? Or from in China, they come down to Malaya after 3-4 generations, Malaysia, East Malaysia, West Malaysia, Christopher Sam cannot speak Chinese anymore. Possible. Acceptable. Went to Australia, UK, Canada, cannot speak Chinese anymore. But imagine if Chinese people in China cannot speak Chinese anymore. Is that a problem or not? Problem not. So this is what's going on. Back in Judah, our children cannot speak Hebrew. Big problem. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. Okay, this one as a remedy. How about this as a remedy, right? This one feels a bit desperate, isn't it? The first one he could just easy, right? The temple, okay, close, take up Tobiah, get security, throw out all the furniture, re-establish everything, he could do it. He's got a remedy. The second one, okay, I cannot trust the guard. The Levites are now with me because I'm paying their salary. So I get the Levites to be the security guard. The Levites are now. He couldn't trust the existing security guards. So now he's posting Levites as security guards. Are Levites supposed to be security guards? Are supposed to be guarding the wall? Well, the Levites were the only people who are now willing to listen to him, isn't it? Because he gave them their jobs back, which means that there are people he couldn't trust. Of course, he couldn't trust Eliashib, the priest, who is related to Tobiah, and he couldn't trust the guards. He has to post his own double posting of guards. And then now, this one, he's run out of ideas. He's ran out of ideas. Confronting them, cursing them, beat them up, pull out their hair. You know, he's desperate. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons and for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women? This one, again, only recently, in Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 30, we will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. So, chapter 10, verse 30, we will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. Chapter 13, in those days, I saw the Jews marry women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. What a collapse, a total collapse of every single point of revival of Ezra and Nehemiah is now decaying right in front of eyes in the last chapter. And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. So Eliashib is not only related to Tobiah, one enemy of Nehemiah, but also the son-in-law, his son was a son-in-law of Sanballat. So Eliashib's grandson became the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. So Eliashib is just making all these marriage alliance, solidifying his position. What could he do about it? What could Nehemiah do about this powerful family? Nothing. What he did was, therefore I chased him from me. Just, that's all he could do. And then comes this shall not remember me, but remember them, oh my God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Remember them, I cannot deal with them. God, you deal with them. Verse 30, verse 31, a bit dodgy. First, I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and the Levites, each in his work. He's got a remedy. Was his remedy successful? I don't think so. And I provided for the wood offering at appointed times, and for the first fruits. Remember me, oh my God, for my good. And that's the end. That is the end of Nehemiah. Can you believe it? Chapter 13, verse 23 to the end. In those days, I saw the Jews at the decay of the intermarriage. You rebel against God by marrying foreign women, and Nehemiah has his remedy, which is a rather embarrassing remedy, if you ask me. And then end with remember me. Oh my God. And that, brothers and sisters, is the end of Ezra and Nehemiah. It ends in decay. What then is Ezra and Nehemiah about? How then should we read this book? We should read this book with what was going on when people were what were their hopes and aspirations while they were in exile, and then the announcement is made that they are coming back from exile. There was a prophetic expectation. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they have prophesied big things. So these are some of the big things that Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel have prophesied when they were in exile. Number one, return to Jerusalem. Done. Number two, rebuild the temple. Okay. Well, return to Jerusalem. Did all of them return? No. Only a tiny minority returned. Most of the Jews didn't even want to return because we're making a good living in Babylon. Esther and Mordecai even went further to Susa, further east. Oh, the exile is over. We can leave Babylon now. The clarion call, go back to Jerusalem in the west. Mordecai and Esther said, no, we're going further east. Well, we're allowed to leave Babylon. Let's go further east to Susa, right? Let's leave Singapore and let's go New York, straight, like that. So, return to Babylon, then return to Jerusalem, small number. Disappointment. Rebuild the temple, disappointment. Some were crying, some were celebrating, but then crying. Couldn't even differentiate, don't know whether to laugh or to cry about the temple. Small. Then a small budget. The prophets say the Messiah will come to lead Israel. Messiah, the king of Israel, the king of the Jews. Who did we end up having? We have Zerubbabel. We have Nehemiah. Now, when he was rebuilding the wall, they accused him. Sanballat, Tobiah was accusing him. Sanballat, Tobiah accusing him. Are you trying to make yourself the king of Judah? I'm going to report to the king of Persia that you are declaring yourself the king of the Jews. And Nehemiah said, no, I am not the king of the Jews. I'm just a governor appointed by the king, the real king of Persia. That he's saying, I'm not the Messiah. Because the Messiah is the King of Kings. The Messiah is the King of the Jews. Will come to lead Israel. That didn't happen. Number four, God will return to the temple. They rebuilt the temple. God didn't return. That is why by the time of the book of Malachi, people were just so sick and tired of the temple already. And they were really just in the upper attitude of the temple. And we can also see here in Ezra and Nehemiah, the temple was in decay because there wasn't a pillar of cloud or pillar of fire on the temple the way it was back then. God never returned to the temple. At the back of the curtain was supposed, at the back of the curtain, the Holy of Holies, is supposed to be the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. So every year, the high priest would, on the Day of Atonement, would supposed to bring the blood of bulls and goats behind the curtain to sprinkle on the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Covenant is not there. So every year you perform that religious service of Day of Atonement, taking blood into, and then smoking up the whole place. Smoke it up for what? The glory of the Lord is not there. There's nothing there. Sprinkle it on what? There's nothing to sprinkle on. The ark is an empty room. It's an empty, the whole thing is empty. And finally, the nations will come to worship God. Far from happening, what the Israelites have, what the Jews have done, they've turned inward. Instead of attracting all the nations, they are repelling all the nations. Even those who married foreigners, make them divorce their foreign wives. If Boaz lived and Ruth lived in those days, they would have made Boaz and Ruth divorce. This is probably the time where the story of Boaz and Ruth became super popular. And said that what? Moabites cannot? What if the Moabites is more Israelite than any Israelite? Right? What if she became the ancestress of King David? Isn't it? So that kind of anti-foreigner, how are you going to get all the nations to come to worship God? So that was the prophetic expectation. What was the reality? The reality, Ezra 1-6, is on the temple. They came back. Zerubbabel brought them back. They rebuilt the temple. There was a crisis, and the solution to the crisis was to reject the people of the land to jointly build the temple. Is that the right thing to do? Is that the wrong thing to do? And then Ezra 7-10 was the revival of the Torah. So 1-6, the revival of the temple. 7-10, the revival of Torah. Ezra comes back, brings offerings, and then he forced the returnees to divorce local women. That's the solution. That is the solution to the crisis. Is that the good solution? Ambiguous. And then we have Nehemiah 1-7. Let's rebuild the wall. Another revival. This time with Nehemiah. The revival is to rebuild the wall. And then rejected working with the Samaritans. Would Jesus have rejected working with the Samaritans? Would the Messiah have rejected the Samaritans? Ambiguous. Ambiguous. So in each of these, the crisis, the conclusion, the solution just leaves something to be desired of. But there were real revivals. Temple, Torah, wall. And then we have chapter 8-12, we have the covenant, where Ezra and Nehemiah come together, and there was a reading of the Torah. There was repentance, there's settlement in Jerusalem, only to experience decay in Nehemiah chapter 13. The temple, the Torah and the wall, and the intermarriage, everything broke down. The prophetic expectation was not reached. Sorry, folks. This was not a real return, was it? This was a revival that never was. A revival that never was. There was a missing ingredient. And if you are a reader of Ezra and Nehemiah reading at that time, you will say, we need a new revival. And the secret, what is missing from that is that if we had someone like Nehemiah, who could have been king of the Jews, but he wasn't. He was just a governor. That is why, while he was with us, everything runs smoothly. But when he had to return to Babylon to serve his earthly master, and he was not around for a few years, and then what happens? Things decay. Okay, even when Nehemiah comes back, his solutions also, like, his remedies were some more successful than others, let's just put it that way. But in the end, Nehemiah too dies. And then what happened? No, what we need is a new revival with the real king of Israel, the rightful king of the Jews, the Messiah who lives and rules eternally, never asleep, never away, always present as our king. Then that will be a new revival. We need the Holy Spirit, as Ezekiel said, as Jeremiah also said, the Holy Spirit to dwell within our hearts, to give us a new heart, then we will obey the law, the statutes, the commandments of the Lord. We will be the dwelling place of God, God's temple. And so, that is the prophetic expectation. And the new revival, brothers and sisters, is now. Because the Messiah has already come. 2,000 years ago, the Messiah came. From Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, Jesus, 14 generations. Brothers and sisters, we are living in the new revival. Jesus Christ is the King of Kings, and the Holy Spirit now lives in our heart. This revival is secure. This revival is effective. This revival has been going on for 2,000 years. And let us not live as people who are continually in decay, continually in maintenance mode, but let us break out from that and take responsibility as people of the Messiah in a new revival, a revival that Ezra and Nehemiah could only dream about, couldn't even smell it from a distance. And now we have it with us. And that is the message that I want to share with you as the conclusion to Ezra and Nehemiah. The gospel is embedded in it, in that it gives you a hope. Nobody could have done it better than Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. But by human effort, that is all that could be done. All that could be done is to have all this smattering of revivals, but then it all just end up dissipating. But now, not by our own strength, but by the Spirit of God, who dwells within us, who walks with us, who leads us and guides us until the Lord returns again. Amen. I'll stop here. Let's have some sharings.